The obsidian chamber of the Galactic conclave hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. The collective quantum communication field that kept thousands of translation matrices synchronized. Delegates from across the known universe settled into their designated spaces, each species occupying a carefully calibrated environmental zone that mimicked their home world's atmospheric conditions. Marcus Chen walked in, and the vibration changed. He was unremarkable by most standards. Average height, slightly above average build, wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it came from a mid-tier terrestrial manufacturer. No visible augmentations, no quantum communication implants, no adaptive camouflage, just a human, carrying a worn leather portfolio that seemed almost anachronistic among the holographic interfaces and biomechanical displays surrounding him. The Zarkam Empire's senior diplomatic courts had heard rumors, whispers that had traversed quantum communication networks and diplomatic back channels. A human who had done the impossible, not through military might or technological superiority, but through something far more complex and terrifying. Understanding. Arxian delegates, crystalline beings whose bodies refracted light in complex geometric patterns, subtly adjusted their quantum resonance fields. The Silicon Collective's quantum-linked representatives, who typically communicated through intricate light patterns, went momentarily still. Even the Cracks Confederacy's biomechanical ambassadors paused their constant low-frequency communications. One did not simply walk into the Galactic conclave unprepared. Marcus Chen's eyes scanned the room, not with the aggressive assessment of a warrior, but with the calm, analytical gaze of someone reading a particularly interesting book. Each delegate felt that gaze, a sensation both uncomfortable and impossible to quantify. It was as if he was seeing through diplomatic facades, past technological barriers, directly into the core motivations of entire civilizations. The chamber itself seemed to respond to his presence. Quantum communication matrices that had been stable for centuries began to subtly recalibrate. Advanced translation systems momentarily flickered, struggling to process the complex human cognitive patterns that defied standard diplomatic communication protocols. Senior diplomat Craaxis of the Zarkon Empire, a being whose body was a living network of neural tendrils and quantum communication nodes, made a nearly imperceptible gesture. Centuries of galactic diplomatic experience had taught him to be cautious of the unknown, and this human represented the most unknown quantity he had encountered in millennia. Marcus approached his designated position with a calm that bordered on indifference. His portfolio, a physical object in a world of digital interfaces, sat on the crystalline surface of his diplomatic station. No holographic displays activated. No quantum communication streams initialized. Just a man, a leather case, and an impossible sense of potential energy. The other delegates knew his reputation. The peace negotiation between the Cracks Confederacy and the Silicon Collective. The resource allocation compromise that had stabilized 3 potentially explosive star system conflicts. Each diplomatic resolution had been so elegantly constructed, so precisely calibrated, that it seemed to defy the very laws of political interaction. But reputation was one thing, presence was another. As Marcus Chen settled into his position, the entire galactic conclave held its collective breath. Something was about to change. And no one, not the most advanced quantum intelligence, not the most complex diplomatic algorithm, could predict exactly what that change would be. The Galactic Conclave's diplomatic protocols were a masterpiece of complex communication. What appeared to be a simple meeting was actually an intricate dance of language, quantum probability, and multidimensional negotiation. The Arxian representative, Ambassador Crystal, began its traditional opening statement, a linguistic performance that was part legal argument, part mathematical theorem, and part cultural performance. Crystal's crystalline body shifted through a spectrum of colors as words flowed. Each syllable was a carefully constructed algorithm, designed to establish dominance, reveal minimal information, and create maximum uncertainty. 37 minutes of pure linguistic complexity that would make most species' communication systems crash, from pure informational overload. Most diplomats would interrupt. Most would attempt to counter-argue or match the complex linguistic pattern. Marcus Chen did neither. He watched, completely still. His right index finger traced a pattern on his leather portfolio, a seemingly absent-minded gesture that would later be analyzed by thousands of quantum intelligence systems. Something about the pattern suggested more complexity than most advanced communication protocols. The other delegates observed Marcus with increasing tension. The Silicon Collective's representatives, beings of pure quantum information, ran countless predictive models. Each model failed spectacularly. No standard diplomatic response matched the human's current behavior. Crystal's linguistic performance reached its zenith. A crescendo of probability statements, legal references, and cultural allusions that technically fulfilled every known diplomatic communication requirement. In the history of the Galactic Conclave, no species had ever successfully responded to such a comprehensive opening statement. When Crystal finally concluded, the chamber fell into a quantum-linked silence. Diplomatic translation matrices hummed with anticipation. Every species waited for the human's response. Marcus looked up. 6 words. Just 6 words that would reshape galactic diplomatic understanding forever. Your great-grandfather would disagree, Ambassador. The effect was instantaneous. Crystal's crystalline form flickered, a response equivalent to a human turning pale with shock. How could a human know something so deeply personal, so precisely targeted? The Silicon Collective's quantum matrices began to overheat. Predictive models collapsed. Information streams became chaotic. Something unprecedented was happening. Ambassador Crystal's communication field wavered. Diplomatic protocols suggested multiple response strategies. Deny, counter-argue, request clarification. But each option felt inadequate. How could one respond to a statement that shouldn't be possible? Marcus continued to watch. No triumph in his eyes. No aggression. Just a calm understanding that suggested he knew far more than he was revealing. The Zarkon Empire's senior diplomats exchanged quantum-linked communications. Emergency protocols were being considered. Mathematical models were being recalculated. The human had done something impossible. He had introduced a completely unpredictable variable into a system that prided itself on absolute predictability. Cryaxis, the senior Zarkon diplomat, made a subtle gesture. Quantum communication streams began to analyze every microsecond of the interaction. What had just happened? How had a human discovered information that should have been impossible to obtain? The leather portfolio sat on a crystalline diplomatic surface, an anachronistic object in a world of quantum interfaces, yet it seemed to hold more potential energy than all the advanced communication systems in the chamber combined. Marcus Chen waited, calm, patient, completely unreadable. The Galactic Conclave had just encountered something it had never seen before, a diplomatic approach that defied every known protocol, every established communication strategy, and it was embodied by a single, unremarkable human. The silence in the Galactic Conclave stretched like a quantum thread, fragile yet impossibly strong. Marcus Chen began to speak, and each word fell into the chamber like precision-guided instruments of revelation. Ambassador Crystal's crystalline form continued to flicker, a response that in its species communication was equivalent to profound shock. The human was doing something unprecedented. He wasn't just responding to the diplomatic statement. He was dismantling an entire generational narrative with surgical precision. Your great-grandfather, Marcus continued, made a compromise during the Third Arxian territorial expansion. A decision that has shaped your diplomatic approach for 3 generations, though you've never fully understood its true origin. Quantum communication matrices across the chamber began to overload. The Silicon Collective's predictive models shattered like fragile glass. How could a human know such deeply buried information? Marcus opened his leather portfolio. No holographic displays activated. No advanced technological interfaces flickered to life. He pulled out a simple physical document, an actual printed page that seemed absurdly primitive in this realm of advanced communication. The document contained a detailed genealogical record, not just names and dates, but intricate connections, personal correspondences, secret negotiations, varied compromises that had shaped entire planetary systems. Crystal's communication field began to destabilize. The crystalline diplomat's usual perfect geometric resonance started to fracture. Every delegate in the chamber felt the moment. Something fundamental was changing. In 2347, Marcus said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, "Your great-grandfather negotiated a territorial compromise that saved the Arxian primary colonies, but the cost was higher than your historical records show. An entire sub-colony was relocated. Their cultural archives were partially lost. The official records paint this as a strategic victory. The truth is more complex." He wasn't accusing. He wasn't threatening. He was simply revealing. The Zarkon Empire's senior diplomatic corps watched in stunned silence. Craaxis, their most experienced negotiator, ran multiple quantum probability scenarios. Each one failed to predict Marcus's next move. What was becoming clear was that Marcus wasn't just presenting information. He was revealing a deeper truth, a narrative that existed between the lines of official history. Each word was a key, unlocking hidden chambers of understanding that no traditional diplomatic approach could access. Crystal's communication field began to stabilize, but something fundamental had changed. The crystalline diplomat was no longer the master of the conversation. That role had been completely upended by this human. The compromise, Marcus continued, was not just a political decision. It was a personal sacrifice. Your great-grandfather knew the cultural cost. He made a choice to preserve the core of Arxian civilization, knowing that future generations would bear a hidden wound. Quantum translators struggled to capture the full depth of his statement. It wasn't just information. It was a form of empathetic communication that transcended traditional diplomatic language. The other delegates leaned forward. The Silicon Collective's representatives began recalibrating their entire communication approach. The Cracks Confederacy's biomechanical ambassadors adjusted their sensory matrices. Something extraordinary was happening. A human was rewriting the very language of diplomatic communication, and he was just getting started. Diplomatic meetings in the Galactic Conclave typically resembled complex mathematical equations. Each species communicated through layers of probabilistic language, where every statement was a carefully calculated move in a multidimensional chess game of interstellar politics. Marcus Chen was about to demonstrate that human communication operated on an entirely different plane of existence. He began with a story, not a report, not a legal argument, a story. "Consider the Orion conflict," Marcus said, his voice smooth and measured. The chamber's translation matrices struggled to capture the nuanced layers of his narrative. Most records describe it as a territorial dispute. The truth is far more intricate. The delegates leaned forward, not physically. Many didn't have bodies that could lean in the traditional sense, but their quantum communication fields tightened, focused, intensely curious. Marcus pulled a holographic projection from his simple leather portfolio. No advanced technological interface activated it. The hologram simply emerged as if responding to the narrative itself. Images of distant star systems, orbital paths, and complex cultural interactions began to weave together. The conflict wasn't about territory, he continued. It was about understanding. The Cracks Confederacy and the Silicon Collective misunderstood each other's fundamental communication methods. What seemed like aggression was actually a complex form of cultural exchange. Crystal, the Arxian ambassador, found its crystalline form vibrating with an emotion closely resembling fascination. The human was doing something impossible. He was revealing connections that no standard diplomatic analysis had ever discovered. Each story Marcus told was a key. Not a key to unlock a door, but a key that could reshape entire dimensional understanding of conflict and cooperation. He wasn't presenting data. He was revealing the invisible threads that connected civilizations. The Zarkon Empire's senior strategists ran countless predictive models. Each model collapsed. Marcus was operating on a level of communication that defied standard analytical approaches. Communication is not about words, Marcus explained. It's about understanding the space between words, the unspoken narratives, the cultural memories that shape every interaction. Quantum communication streams began to recalibrate. The Silicon Collective's representatives found their most advanced translation matrices becoming obsolete. This human was introducing a completely new paradigm of understanding. Crataxis, the senior Zarkon diplomat, realized something profound was happening. Marcus wasn't just sharing information. He was demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to understanding complex systems. The holographic projection continued to evolve. Star systems transformed. Cultural interactions played out in intricate, almost living detail. It was less a presentation and more a living narrative that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. Every conflict, Marcus said, is a conversation waiting to be understood. Every misunderstanding is an opportunity for deeper connection. The delegates from various star systems found themselves seeing their longest-standing enemies through an entirely new lens. Conflicts that had seemed insurmountable now appeared as misunderstandings waiting to be resolved. Marcus wasn't conquering through force or traditional diplomacy. He was showing these advanced civilizations something they had forgotten: the power of genuine understanding. The Galactic Conclave had never encountered anything like this. A human was rewriting the very language of interstellar communication, one story at a time. The Omega Quadrant hung in the holographic display like a wound waiting to be healed. Generations of conflict had transformed the resource-rich star systems into a geopolitical minefield so complex that most diplomatic missions refused to even attempt negotiation. Marcus Chen saw something entirely different. The conflict began, he said, his voice cutting through centuries of accumulated tension, not with resources, but with a misunderstood communication in 2214. The delegates froze. Not a physical freeze. Many didn't have bodies that could freeze in the traditional sense, but a quantum-level pause of absolute attention. He pulled forward a series of historical documents. Physical papers in a world of quantum data streams. Each document seemed to breathe with untold stories, with the weight of unspoken histories that had shaped entire civilizations. The first contact between the Crax mining expedition and the Silicon Collective's deep space research team was not a moment of aggression, Marcus explained. It was a profound misunderstanding of communication protocols. The holographic display began to shift, not through technological manipulation, but as if the very narrative was reshaping the visual representation. Star systems transformed. Communication patterns emerged like intricate neural networks. Crystal, the Arxian ambassador, found its crystalline form vibrating with an emotion that transcended standard diplomatic responses: fascination, shock, recognition. Marcus detailed how a simple communication delay, less than 0.003 standard time units, had been interpreted as a hostile action. The Crax expedition's quantum communication burst had been slightly out of synchronization with the Silicon Collective's reception protocols. What should have been a routine deep space encounter became the spark of a conflict that would last generations. Every defensive action, he continued, was actually a misinterpreted attempt at communication. The Zarkon Empire's senior strategists ran countless probability models. Each one collapsed. Marcus was revealing a narrative that existed between the lines of official historical records. Quantum communication streams began to recalibrate. The Silicon Collective's most advanced translation matrices started to break down and rebuild themselves. This was more than a historical analysis. This was a fundamental reimagining of interstellar conflict. Crataxis, the senior Zarkon diplomat, realized something profound was happening. Marcus wasn't just presenting information. He was revealing the human capacity to see connections that transcended traditional diplomatic understanding. A holographic display continued to evolve. Cultural interactions played out in intricate, almost living detail. Misunderstandings transformed into potential moments of connection. Conflicts revealed as complex conversations waiting to be understood. Communication is not about words, Marcus said, echoing his earlier statement but adding new depth. It's about understanding the space between words, the unspoken narratives that shape every interaction. Delegates from multiple star systems found themselves seeing their longest-standing enemies through an entirely new lens. Conflicts that had seemed insurmountable now appeared as intricate misunderstandings waiting to be resolved. The Omega Quadrant, once a symbol of endless conflict, began to look like a canvas of potential cooperation. Marcus wasn't offering a solution. He was revealing the fundamental misunderstandings that had created the conflict in the first place. The Galactic Conclave had never encountered anything like this. A human was rewriting the very language of interstellar understanding, one historical thread at a time. The Zarkon Empire's most senior strategists gathered their quantum intelligence networks into a tight, focused matrix. Something unprecedented was happening in the Galactic Conclave, and they needed to understand exactly how one human was rewriting the fundamental principles of diplomatic engagement. Marcus Chen represented a type of intelligence that defied every known analytical model. Traditional galactic negotiation relied on complex data analysis, quantum probability calculations, and multilayered communication algorithms. Centuries of diplomatic interactions have been built on a foundation of mathematical precision, predictive modeling, and carefully constructed linguistic frameworks. Marcus operated on an entirely different level. Craaxis, the senior diplomatic coordinator, began running comprehensive analysis protocols. Each quantum intelligence stream attempted to deconstruct Marcus's communication approach. Each attempt failed spectacularly. The human wasn't just presenting information. He was revealing connections that existed beyond traditional data points. Each statement was a multidimensional key that unlocked entire networks of understanding previously invisible to galactic civilizations. Intelligence is not about information, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the quantum communication fields. It's about understanding the narrative that connects information. The delegates watched as he began to map out complex interstellar relationships, not through standard diplomatic charts or probability matrices, but through a storytelling approach that made entire star systems feel like interconnected living systems. Chryssal, the Arxian ambassador, found its crystalline form vibrating with an unprecedented emotional response. The human was demonstrating a form of strategic thinking that transcended technological capabilities. Marcus pulled forward a series of historical documents, physical papers that seemed to pulse with unspoken stories. Each document was less a record of past events and more a living narrative waiting to be understood. The Silicon Collective's quantum intelligence networks began to recalibrate. Their most advanced predictive models collapsed and reformed, struggling to comprehend this new approach to understanding complex systems. Every conflict, Marcus explained, is a conversation waiting to be understood. Every misunderstanding is an opportunity for deeper connection. He wasn't presenting a diplomatic strategy. He was revealing a fundamental approach to understanding complex systems that went beyond technological capabilities. The Zarkon Empire's strategists realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus was demonstrating a form of intelligence that didn't just process information, it transformed it. Each narrative thread he pulled became a bridge between seemingly impossible differences. Quantum communication streams began to shift. The very fabric of diplomatic interaction seemed to be reorganizing itself around Marcus's approach. Craaxis understood something profound was happening. This human was introducing a completely new paradigm of strategic thinking, not through technological superiority or military might, but through a deep, almost intuitive understanding of complex systems. The holographic displays continued to evolve. Cultural interactions played out in intricate, almost living detail. Conflicts transformed into potential moments of connection. Misunderstandings revealed as complex conversations waiting to be understood. The Galactic Conclave had never encountered anything like this. A human was rewriting the very language of interstellar strategic thinking, one narrative thread at a time. And they were just beginning to understand the true depth of what that meant. The Galactic Conclave began to transform around Marcus Chen. It wasn't a physical change. The massive obsidian chamber remained unchanged, but something far more fundamental was shifting in the very fabric of interstellar communication. Species that had been enemies for millennia started to see potential pathways to cooperation. Conflicts that had seemed insurmountable now appeared as misunderstandings waiting to be resolved. Craaxis, the senior Zarkon diplomat, watched in stunned silence as Marcus continued to deconstruct centuries of diplomatic barriers. The human wasn't just presenting information. He was revealing the intricate connections that had been overlooked by countless advanced civilizations. Communication is an ecosystem, Marcus explained, his words creating holographic representations that seemed to breathe with living complexity. Each interaction is not a single event, but a network of potential connections. The Silicon Collective's quantum intelligence matrices began to recalibrate. Their most advanced predictive models collapsed and reformed, struggling to comprehend this new approach to understanding complex systems. Chryssal, the Arxian ambassador, found its crystalline form vibrating with an emotion that transcended standard diplomatic responses. Fascination, shock, a growing recognition of something profound. Marcus pulled forward a series of historical documents, not digital files, but physical papers that seemed to pulse with unspoken stories. Each document was a thread in a larger narrative tapestry that he could see and manipulate with extraordinary precision. The delegates realized that Marcus wasn't conquering through force or traditional diplomacy. He was showing these advanced civilizations something they had forgotten: the power of genuine understanding. Quantum communication streams began to shift. The very framework of diplomatic interaction seemed to be reorganizing itself around Marcus's approach. Entire star systems that had been locked in centuries-long conflicts began to look different. Potential became visible where only barriers had existed before. Every civilization, Marcus said, carries a story. Most conflicts arise from the parts of the story that remain unheard. Holographic displays evolved in real time. Cultural interactions played out in intricate, almost living detail. Conflicts transformed into potential moments of connection. Misunderstandings revealed as complex conversations waiting to be understood. The Zarkon Empire's senior strategists ran comprehensive analysis protocols. Each attempt to categorize Marcus's approach failed. He was operating on a level of communication that defied traditional analytical models. Craaxis understood something profound was happening. This human was introducing a completely new paradigm of strategic thinking, not through technological superiority or military might, but through a deep, almost intuitive understanding of complex systems. The Galactic Conclave itself seemed to be breathing differently. The quantum communication fields that had maintained diplomatic interactions for centuries were being rewritten. Not destroyed, not replaced, transformed. Marcus wasn't presenting a new diplomatic strategy. He was revealing a fundamental approach to understanding complex systems that went beyond technological capabilities. Each narrative thread he pulled became a bridge between seemingly impossible differences. Species that had considered themselves fundamentally incompatible began to see potential for communication. The very concept of conflict was being reimagined. Intelligence, Marcus continued, is not about gathering information. It's about understanding the connections between information. The delegates from multiple star systems found themselves seeing their longest-standing enemies through an entirely new lens. Conflicts that had seemed insurmountable now appeared as intricate misunderstandings waiting to be resolved. The Galactic Conclave had never encountered anything like this. A human was rewriting the very language of interstellar understanding, one narrative thread at a time. The final moments of the Galactic Conclave would be remembered as a turning point in interstellar communication. Marcus Chen stood at the center of a transformed diplomatic landscape, having done something no one thought possible. Craaxis, the senior Zarkon diplomat, realized that humanity had just demonstrated a form of intelligence that transcended technological capabilities. It wasn't about conquest or domination. It was about understanding. The massive obsidian chamber seemed to hold its breath. Quantum communication matrices that had maintained diplomatic interactions for centuries now pulsed with a new kind of energy. Marcus had not destroyed the existing system. He had revealed its potential. Diplomacy is not about winning, Marcus said, his final statement hanging in the air like a living thing. It's about understanding the story that connects us all. Crystal, the Arxian ambassador, found its crystalline form transformed. The rigid diplomatic protocols that had defined interstellar interactions for millennia now appeared as primitive constructs. Marcus had shown them something far more profound. Holographic displays continued to evolve, revealing intricate networks of potential cooperation. Star systems that had been locked in centuries of conflict now appeared as interconnected ecosystems of possibility. Each connection was a story waiting to be understood. The Silicon Collective's quantum intelligence networks recalibrated completely. Their most advanced predictive models had been shattered and rebuilt. Marcus had introduced a fundamentally new approach to understanding complex systems. Delegates from across the galaxy found themselves seeing their longest-standing enemies through an entirely different lens. Conflicts that had seemed insurmountable now appeared as misunderstandings waiting to be resolved. Potential had replaced impossibility. Marcus wasn't just a diplomat. He was a storyteller, a bridge builder, someone who could see the invisible threads connecting entire civilizations. The Zarkon Empire's senior strategists ran final analysis protocols. Each attempt to categorize Marcus's approach failed. He had demonstrated a form of strategic thinking that went beyond traditional diplomatic models. Every civilization, Marcus had said earlier, carries a story. Most conflicts arise from the parts of the story that remain unheard. The Galactic Conclave had been transformed, not through force, not through technology, but through understanding. As Marcus prepared to leave, the delegates realized something profound. Humanity was not just another species to be categorized or understood. They were something entirely different, a civilization that could see connections others missed, that could transform conflict into conversation. Craaxis understood that this was more than a diplomatic meeting. This was a fundamental shift in how intelligent species might interact across the universe. The leather portfolio Marcus carried seemed to pulse with untold stories, a simple object that held more potential than entire technological networks. The quantum communication fields began to stabilize, but nothing would be the same. The very concept of diplomatic interaction had been reimagined. As Marcus Chen walked out of the Galactic Conclave, he wasn't leaving as a conqueror. He was leaving as a storyteller who had shown an entire universe how to listen. The Empire trembled, not from fear of destruction, but from the profound recognition that everything they understood about communication, conflict, and connection had just been irrevocably changed. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and they had done so not with weapons or technology, but with something far more powerful: understanding.